Today we're going to be rounding decimal numbers. Now, why do we round? We usually round numbers to make them easier to work with. Often we're rounding because we're going to be doing some mental calculation, and so it doesn't really help to just have memorized some rounding rules. You're trying to make sense of the numbers that you're working with, and so that's why I always prefer this number line approach when rounding numbers. So let's say we're just going to round to the nearest hundredth here. So usually with the rounding rule, kids are taught to look back to the number before, and that will tell you which number to round to. Well, that's correct, but here's why it works. So when I'm trying to round to the nearest hundredth, I want to think, what are the two hundredths that it is between? So in this case, this number is between 4 and 57 hundredths and 4 and 58 hundredths. Then I have to determine which one of these it's closer to. So I'm going to need to find my midpoint. So in between 57 hundredths and 58 hundredths would be 57 hundredths plus 5 more thousandths. And that's why our rounding rules were always concerned about 5 are up, go up, and below 5, go down. But students can just mistake and mess up and forget those rounding rules so easily. So that's why I love this number line method. Now that I've got my bottom and my top rounding options plus the midpoint, I can see that 572 thousandths is less than 575 thousandths. And so it would go about here on my number line, which means that in this case it would round to 4 and 57 hundredths would be its rounding to the nearest hundredth. Well, now let's look at rounding to the nearest tenth. Now let's take the same number, but now we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So we're looking in this place, and what are the two options for what is the tenth number that is just below this entire number and just above this entire number? Well, since this already has 5 tenths, the lower option would be 4 and 5 tenths. And if we added one more tenth, it would be 4 and 6 tenths. So these are our two options for rounding this number to the nearest tenth. Again, we need to find the midpoint. What would be exactly between 4 and 5 tenths and 4 and 6 tenths? Well, since our number system is base 10, 5 hundredths would be right in between the 2 tenths. So 4 and 55 hundredths would be between 4 and 5 tenths and 4 and 6 tenths. Now, if you're not sure about this, you can always just add some zeros in the hundredths place. 4 and 5 tenths is the same amount as 4 and 50 hundredths, and 4 and 6 tenths is the same amount as 4 and 60 hundredths. Now I can easily see, oh yeah, okay, 55 is right in the middle of 50 and 60. That makes it a little easier for me to understand. Now, I'm going to cover up the thousandths place right now just so I can focus on, since I have hundredths on my number line, 4 and 57 hundredths. Well, if that's 55, 60, 57 is a little closer to 55 than 60. So about right here, 57 hundredths, and then maybe another couple notches for the 2 thousandths. 4 and 572 thousandths would go right here. So it's more than 4 and 55 hundredths. So it would round to 4 and 60 hundredths, or 4 and 6 tenths. Now we'll take the same number and round it to the nearest whole. The nearest whole number being 4. All right, so which whole numbers is this number between? Well, this number is a little bit more than 4 wholes. So we'll start with 4 wholes here, and then the next whole would be 5. So this number is somewhere between 4 wholes and 5 wholes. Is it closer to 4 wholes or 5 wholes? Let's see. We got to find the midpoint first. So right in between 4 and 5 would be 4.5, or 4 and 5 tenths. So again, just like we did on the last number line, if it helps you to add the tenths place, both of them, so it's easier to see, 4 and 0 tenths, 4 and 5 tenths, 5 and 0 tenths. Then I can look at the number in which it's 4 and 5 tenths. Ooh, it seems like it's right there, but I still have some more decimal places. I have the hundredths place and the thousandths place. So it's just slightly more. It's 72 thousandths greater than 4 and 5 tenths. So it's just going to be just to the right of that midpoint. That's why it's so crucial to find that midpoint, because we can see that these extra digits after the tenths place, they just inch that number just to the right of that midpoint. So 4 and 572 thousandths would be just right of the midpoint, which means that they would round over to 5 wholes for the nearest whole. I encourage you when you're rounding numbers, decimal numbers, but also just whole numbers, to use this number line model, because not only will it help you to understand why you might round up in one case, but you might have to go round down if you're rounding to another place value. It'll help you understand that better, but it also just helps build your number sense so that you can manipulate and play with numbers in your mind and be a better mathematician in general. So use this number line model, find the lower and the upper options for which numbers you could round to, find the midpoint, and then you can place an X on the number line where your actual number is to see if you should round up or round down.